As you just heard, I'm Jack Mormon, Harris County Commissioner for Precinct 2, which encompasses about 99% of the entire ship channel. So being the moderator for this panel, transportation and logistics, is really near and dear to my heart, and we've got a wonderful panel for us to talk about and work with. So I'm going to get started. What we'll do is I'll introduce each of the panelists. Won't do the whole bio, you've got it there with your materials, and then they'll do their presentation one after the other, and then time permitting, we'll have a Q&A session. You should have some note cards on your table. If you have a question, write it down. If you want it directed to a specific panelist, write that too, and then hold it up, and staff will come around and pick them up, and we'll get through as many as we can after the presentation. So let me go ahead and introduce our panel. First, to my immediate left, we got Tom Marion, who is the General Counsel and Administrative Manager for Buffalo Marine Service. Tom retired from the Coast Guard in 2005 after serving as Commander Officer of Vessel Traffic and Judge Advocate. Among his many community activities, he's currently Chairman of the Houston Port Bureau Board of Directors. He's also a lawyer, so we got about 3 lawyers up here. We apologize in advance. Jeff Norwood is General Manager for the Port Terminal Railroad Association, so he's responsible for the day-to-day operations of that entity. He spent 35 years in the railroad industry, and I can tell you from personal experience, he's incredibly knowledgeable and incredibly easy to work with, so we're glad to have Jeff on board here. Lawrence Waldron is the Global Account Director for Vopak Terminal Deer Park, my hometown, just down the road. He is a professional engineer, has an MBA from the University of Texas, and a Master's of Chemical Engineering from the University of Houston. Last but not least, we've got Matt Woodruff. He is the Director of Governmental Affairs for Kirby Corporation. He's an attorney and a Texas A&M grad who has spent most of his career representing inland marine interests. He's an officer and director of many industry groups, and in 2005, he retired from the Naval Reserve as commander. So panelists, thank you all for being here today, and without further delay, Tom, please take it away.
Oh, thank you very much, Commissioner. Good afternoon. The room is more than half full. That's a good thing. We must be doing something right here. And I have the honor of sitting at a table with a former Navy veteran. I'm in the Coast Guard, and there are a lot of stories you can tell about how the Coast Guard is the hard nucleus in which the Navy forms around during time of war, but I won't say that to Matt because he's an intel guy and he'll hack my phones and he'll get naked pictures off the cloud, so we won't go there. But I will tell you as an introduction with regards to the, can we get the first slide on my presentation? There it is. Oh, okay, you got it. I will tell you by way of introduction, I spent my last tour in the Coast Guard was the Vessel Traffic Service, and I live in Kingwood, Texas. And sometimes I'd come home in uniform, and the neighbors who didn't really know who I was would see me in uniform and say, oh, you're in the Air Force. I said, no, I'm in the Coast Guard, same color, so, wrong service, Coast Guard. And they would then ask me, well, how's that commute down to Galveston? And I'd say, well, what do you mean down to Galveston? Well, the Coast Guard is down in Galveston because that's the Gulf of Mexico. I said, well, actually, the Coast Guard has a much more robust presence on the Houston Ship Channel. And then they would look at me quizzically and scratch their heads and say, the Houston Ship what? So you just found that a lot of people don't know what goes on in their backyard. And as a brown water guy, the blue water sailors on those big ships that call upon Lawrence's terminal, they're the sexy and glamorous vessels that move a lot of stuff. But us brown water guys, we're knuckle-dragging sailors, and we just move things from A to B. We don't like to go beyond the jetties because that's deep water and something bad may happen, and we don't want to visit Davy Jones. So I'm here to focus on brown water. Let me give you an overview first. Now, people have talked about the United States merchant fleet. After World War II, it was one of the largest fleets in the world. The U.S. government sold off the several thousand Liberty ships, and we became one of the smaller fleets in the merchant fleets in the world. To this day, on the blue water side, I think we're down to about maybe 1%, if not less than that, of total tonnage on the blue water side. But when you take into account the brown water, that is the tugs and tows which transit the inland waterways of the United States, and the western rivers, we are a significant presence when it comes to maritime capacity. And you'll see right there that there are over 17,000 dry cargo barges. Now that's off about 1.5% in the last year. And I'm going to focus on the tank barge side of the equation because those are what concerns many of us given that we live in a petrochemical center of the United States. Oh, I have to press this thing? Oh, shoot. This is, there we go. Okay, then see, now you can see what I'm talking about. That's good. And the barges are dumb. What I mean by that is they're not self-propelled vessels. They need horsepower. So to move all those tank barges and dry cargo barges, you have about 4,000 push boats or tugs. Now, people sometimes say tugs. You know, you see the ocean, a tugboat, hawser, you pull something. But in the Gulf Coast, the inland waterway system, we push things. We have push knees. And there's a picture right there. Sorry, Matt, it's not Kirby. Matter of fact, there will be no Kirby pictures here, just Buffalo Marine. But you'll see a push boat with its push knees. And what's important with respect to what we bring to the table is Jones Act. Now, what's Jones Act? Some people, it's a cabotage law. Some people would say it's a pro-union thing. But ultimately, Jones Act is about national security, and it's about being able to put U.S. citizens to work on U.S.-built vessels that are constructed in U.S. shipyards. These individuals, they generally don't have, they don't have PhDs in fluid mechanics. They have high school degrees. Some have college degrees. But in a matter of 5 years, you can go from a deckhand making $40,000 a year to a tankerman making $70,000+ a year to a master or captain of a push boat making about $125,000+. If you work in the upper river, you're doing some of the Chicago runs, you can make about $185,000 a year plus bonuses. So it's great work, and they're U.S. sailors. And what's significant is that because they have merchant mariner credentials, is overseen by the U.S. Coast Guard, they all have to go through extensive background investigations. Some of you who have to go down on the waterfront either have to be escorted or have that beautiful TWIC, Transportation Worker Identification Credential card, so that you can go on that facility, on that waterfront facility, without an escort. Well, every single person that we employ and all our other companies employ on the waterways have TWICs. The point of this is that given what's going on in the industry right now with respect to demand on the tank barge side of the equation, you have a shipyard industry which is going great guns right now. Many shipyards, their orders are booked through 2016. In the Gulf Coast, you have capacity, about 80 to 85% capacity on the brown water side, not the blue water side. So the bottom line is you have a significant amount of activity going on. You'll see at the very bottom the tank barge construction rate. From 2012, it doubled. That was a significant jump. In 2013, it jumped 28% more, and in 2014, it's up conservatively about 15%. Horsepower construction's up 25%. So there's a lot of activity going on in our immediate vicinity when it comes to new vessel construction, because it's got to be a U.S.-built vessel if you're moving cargoes and commodities from point to point on the inland waterways. So what drives tank barges? Now, I don't want to upset my railroad brethren to my left, but you guys remember that jealous tank gasoline can commercial years ago when you had that gasoline container piningly or covetously looking at the train because it came off a truck, and how a train has far better fuel efficiency and what have you? Well, we got them both beat. So that gas can really wants to be around us. And why is that? We get 1,616 tons per mile on a gallon of gas compared to 478 for trains, which is great. Trains are wonderful, but trucks, 150. A 30,000 barrel tank barge, which is just standard tank barge, that by itself holds about 1.2 million gallons of cargo, liquid cargo, but that's equivalent to 46 rail cars or 144 trucks. So you can see there's economy of scale there with regard to marine transportation. And of course, it does not hurt that the safety record in our industry is about 18 times better than that of rail and 132 times better than truck. What I mean by that is that for every incident that you have on the waterway, you have 18 on the rail and you have 132 in the trucks. It has nothing to do with medical marijuana in California or interstate highway systems that run through Washington State or Colorado. All of our guys have got to be drug-free. That's part of the whole TWIC thing. Barging Energy. Okay, so What does that mean as to what's going on right now due to the shale gas bounty, this renaissance, this energy renaissance that's unfolding? As you had seen in the Panama Canal presentation, there's a significant amount of exports moving out of Houston throughout the world. In fact, Houston is the #1 export port in the United States. More to the point, 25% of the total tonnage that comes into the United States flows into Texas ports. It's a huge number when you think about that there's 351 ports in the United States, and I'm talking about 12 major ports in the coast of Texas. But what the barges do, because they can't go beyond the jetties, is they're moving cargoes and goods along the intercoastal waterway. We call it the ditch. It is the post-World War II miracle. You could not do it today because of all the environmental regulations. And a trivia point is that it was actually built because of all the tankers that were torpedoed by the Germans during World War II. The United States realized they had to be able to move goods to and from markets in a safe fashion. So how do you do that? You dredge a 125-foot wide, 10-foot deep, or 12-foot deep ditch along the entire coast, east coast of the United States, and the vast majority of the Gulf Coast. So in Texas alone, you got 406 miles of intercoastal waterway. What does that move? About 77 million tons of freight a year, and 99% of that is crude, petroleum, chemical. And what's petroleum? You've heard it before. It's the fuel, oil, gas, naphtha, what have you. Now, one of the things that this barge building boom has done is not only replace or augment demand to move these cargoes to and from Texas via the inland waterway system, it's also served to replace an aging fleet. And in fact, when you look at the sheer number of tank barges, in the last couple of years, the average age of a tank barge has dropped from 19 to 16 years. Now, that may not seem significant, but again, that is quite an accomplishment in a short period of time. An additional footnote is that some of you are probably familiar with Open 90, Exxon Valdez, all that stuff. Well, that gave rise to a law that said that single-skin tank barges had to be gone. They could not be used by 2015. It's almost, we're on the cusp of 2015, and for all intents and purposes, every single tank barge out there is a double-skin tank barge. And the terminals won't let single skins come in anyways if you wanted to cheat a bit. So what are drivers as far as tank barges and commerce and everything else? Well, LNG, fuel, on the export side in particular. At the last quarter of 2015, 3 million gallons of liquid methane will be pumped out of Sabine, and that's going to begin this huge train of exports of LNG. You'll probably see on its heels, if not simultaneously, the use of LNG as fuel for vessels as more and more vessel owners opt to use liquid methane or use methane to power their vessels for a variety of reasons. You've had the expansion of shale gas. The Tuscaloosa play right now is receiving a lot of attention, and you're going to see barges on those waterways, the Tennessee Tom Bigby and the Intercoastal Waterway, moving those materials into the refinery infrastructure. That's going to expand dramatically. The Panama Canal, which you've heard about, is going to increase the amount of tonnage that comes into the United States and leaves the United States. And remember, the best way to think about this is that the ports are the major on-ramps for which commerce unfolds in the country. The adjacent waterways, the intercoastal waterway, the rivers and what have you, those are the spokes, part of the distribution system, which are mainly served by the tows and tugs and barges I'm referring to. You know, a lot of the stuff that we bring in, you know, you bring stuff in, you sell stuff, to other parts of the world, other countries, is because people consume stuff. That's a good thing for our economy. And if you look at the San Antonio, Austin, Houston, and Dallas, you look at that area, it is the largest growing geographic section of the United States by population. More people, more goods, more demand. And to that point, you're seeing a lot more aggregates and building and construction material that's coming into the United States on break bulk vessels and being moved around by barges. So this is a feeding frenzy of economic activity which moves on the waterways because it's cheaper and it's more efficient and it's environmentally it's better for all of us. I'm not going to talk about the challenge of the infrastructure on the inland side. That's Matt Woodruff is an expert in that area. He'll talk about the Waterways Trust Fund, export of crude, and that's going to change the dynamic as to what happens to our industry as far as the collection of condensates from shale gas play and how they're moved in and out of the refinery infrastructure. So that could have an impact on the tank barge industry. And finally, if you look at the most conservative, this is a question everyone asks, well, how much is it going to grow? If you look at the most conservative prognostications with respect to inland marine transportation, it's 4 to 5% for 10 to 12 years, and some are saying 15 years. I mean, that is a spectacular type of growth when you look at industries. So it's very impressive. Challenges, I mean, you can build boats, you can hire additional shipyard workers, but if you don't have licensed mariners to move to crew those vessels, then you got a problem. It's heavily regulated. The time to get from, say, a deckhand entry level to maybe in the wheelhouse is a good 5 to 6 years. So you can't grow a mariner overnight. A lot of the companies are growing their own mariners, and they're trying to do it in a cost-effective, efficient way to breed loyalty, because what happens is as all these new push boats come out, there's a lot of poaching. And Kirby doesn't do that, of course, but some companies will go out and dangle a lot of money in front of these captains, and they'll jump ship. And not, you know, again, capitalism's a beautiful thing, but we got to deal with it. Infrastructure, we've got to deal with ensuring that those things that are approaching well beyond the end of their shelf life are properly maintained. And then regulations, and you've heard previous discussions about regulations and the EPA, how business friendly they are, and how this administration loves coal, and how they view fossil fuels as, oh wait, I'm talking about the previous administration. But anyways, what I'm referring to is that there are a lot of regulations that just drive us nuts. For example, on that push boat, the AC condensate, which drips from the air conditioner and then runs off the deck, that's a regulated discharge. When a tow gets rained upon, and the rain lands on the surface of the tow, and then it runs in the water, that's a regulated discharge. When we push a tow across Galveston Bay, and the weather gets bad, and a wave breaks over the bow of the rake of the barge, and then runs on the deck and runs back off, that's a regulated discharge. You got at some point, it's got to stop. It really does. And those are the things that we're dealing with. And then, you know, the notion that what applies for the blue water, the guys that sail internationally, should apply to the brown water community, we view that as being onerous and overkill. The inland mariners have different rules, have different requirements, and therefore they don't need to be regulated in the same fashion as some of the international sailors that steam across the oceans as compared to across a harbor. And then there's, last but not least, there's the fracking myths. You've all heard them before. I'm a pro-industry, pro-fracking type of guy, and I grew up in southern Canada where, you know, if you breathe the wrong way, they're going to regulate you. So I'm telling you that it's safe, and our industry's benefiting from it, and we're all benefiting from it in a number of ways as consumers. So I probably took up more time because I'm a lawyer and I'm allowed to do that. But I want to thank you, look forward to any questions you have, and again, barges may not be sexy, but they're beautiful to us because they get the job done and they do it in a cost-effective fashion. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Now, without further ado, Jeff Norwood, GM, PTRA.
Is it this one?
Yeah.
All right. Does this come off? I have trouble standing. Will this come off? There it goes. Yeah, I have trouble standing behind the podium, so I'm going to walk around a little bit. How many rail buffs we got out here in the audience? Oh my God, we got just one? That's it? One rail buff? Our trains are sexy. That's one thing. Our engines are red and yellow, and they look really nice, right? So let me ask you a question. How long has the PTRA Railroad been around Houston, Texas? You're a rail buff, right? Close? Anybody else? Did I miss anybody? Anybody else want to guess? I'm getting close. What is it? 90 what? 1990? Oh, 1924, you're right. Been around 90 years. So, great. Obviously, with the only 2 or 3 of you that even took a shot at that, did most of you here know that there is a railroad in Houston? Huh? Oh, I know why you know that, because we're the guys that block the crossings and you can't get to work or get home, right? I got it, okay, all right. Well, we try not to do that, but we also want you to make sure that you stop, look, and listen before you go across that crossing to make sure there's not a train coming. So I won't go any further with that. I'll tell you a little bit about the history part of it, which started on, and there we go, 1924. Can you imagine 18 railroads and 13 miles trying to service industries on the ship channel? That would be a little difficult. So our forefathers thought about this and said, you know what? We need an association to take care of our customers. So here we are, PTRA Railroad. One more question for you now, because I'm on the history side. Do you know how many members we have of the association right now? Okay. I bet nobody can get that one right. Yeah. RD would know that because he's been in a number of meetings. Okay. All right. So there are 4. Here we are. We have the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, which some of you, I'm sure, are really good friends with Warren Buffett, so y'all probably know all about that railroad. You've also got the Union Pacific Railroad, the Kansas City Southern, or the Tex-Mex, and then the Port of Houston, which there's a lot of folks around here from the Port of Houston. So we have 4 association members. So everybody understand we are an association, right? Okay, all right. Okay, well, there's 226 customers out there that we service one way or another, and that's normally with rail cars, some type of rail car. We have 7 serving yards that we work out of. We maintain 172 miles of railroad. And again, we're not big, we're very small, but we have a lot of railroad out there. We've got 20 bridges that we maintain. We handle approximately 58,000 rail cars a month, and we average 1,200 starts a month. So what that says is we have 350 employees that we employ, and there's 3 folks normally on that train out there. So that tells you how many folks are out there at the entire month. I don't have to do the math for you. All right. So here's the area that we service. The middle portion, of course, is a ship channel. The top portion is, we call it the North Shore Subdivision. And to kind of put that in perspective of where that route runs, again, it's 13 miles. That area kind of follows I-10 and then goes down Jacinto Boulevard and stops down. Basically, a lot of you have probably seen Cargill's towers and such that are down toward the north end of the ship, or the south end of the ship channel on the north side. That area, that's where we end down there. So it's about 13 miles, and there's just customers galore on both sides of that railroad. We also have an area up around Clinton Drive that's called the Turning Basin, predominantly services all the docks in the Port of Houston. And there's 32 now, soon to be 33, is that right, with the new construction that's going on? So that area is really growing. We handle a lot of high-value type loads out of the Port of Houston. The other area is the South Shore, and that's that lighter blue at the bottom. That area starts about Manchester, and if you follow 225, just follow 225, and it goes all the way to Barber's Cut. So 226 customers in that little area, 26 miles of actual railroad that we operate on. We've got about 4,000 cars of capacity in our yards, those 7 serving yards that I was talking about. At any given time, there's about 2,200 cars that we spot and pull, and then just about any day of the week, there's going to be at least 9,000 rail cars sitting around all the industries in Houston. So let me break it down a little bit, because we're talking about petrochemical. That's what we're here for, to tell you a little bit more about what's going on and what we do in the petrochemical side of it. 68% of the traffic that we handle basically is petrochemical, is based on the petrochemical and energy market right here. So 22% in chemical, and you can see the others: plastic, coke, coal, crude, ethanol. The one thing that's really starting to grow, and we're going to see more growth in, is the crude, especially out of the Bakken. So we're going to see a lot more growth. We're anticipating annually about 6% growth right now. So take that 58,000 and do that math over the next 5 years to give you a pretty good idea about how many more rail cars, how many more trains you're going to see traversing through the Houston area. Are we ready? Well, our member lines and all of our members in the last 5 years have invested $32 million in just maintenance to make sure our railroads are safe to operate on and infrastructure to give us more capacity to handle the trains. And they're also committed to investing more money as we need it as our business grows. Future, we're geared up, we're ready. So any of you crude oil shippers, ethanol shippers, anything you want to ship, bring it on. We want the business. We're ready to go. We've added a bunch of capacity already. We'll add more. So we're open for business. Bring it on. And with that, that's it. I think question and answers at the end. So appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Hi, my name is Lawrence Waldron. I'm with Vopak Terminals here in Houston. We're a Dutch company, have our corporate headquarters in Rotterdam, but the Americas business is run here out of the Houston area. And we have a large facility out on the Houston Ship Channel, which I'd like to talk a little bit about that, and I'd also like to talk a little bit about the industry and the outlook coming forward. So guys in the rail industry and barging industry, they send their rail cars and their barges out on these long voyages, and it could take several days, go from North Dakota all the way down to Houston, up the Mississippi River on the Intercoastal Waterway, and then finally they arrive at the terminal. And what they like when they get to the terminal is a quick turnaround time. So I'm going to try to deliver that right now as a quick turnaround time on the speech, so I'll only be up here for a few minutes. So. If we look at the liquid terminals, this is a typical view that you see on the screen on what we have for a liquid terminal. So you have storage tanks. If you've driven down 225, Highway 225, that's probably a common sight that you've seen, is these white storage tanks that are storing all the petroleum and chemical products and feedstocks. But then also the part that you can't see from the highway is the water interface. And so we also have jetties and docks in which barges and also deep sea vessels can come and dock at our facilities and either load or offload cargoes. And then also there's rail lines that are coming into the facility as well. So there's a lot of parallels that you see between a facility like this and what the Port of Houston might have as well for handling pipe that's coming in from Asia or containers that are bringing products in or out. One key difference that we have as a mode of transportation that is a little bit hidden is pipelines. Our facilities are pipeline connected, and we can move cargoes in and out via pipeline. So we might be pipeline connected to a chemical plant or a refinery, et cetera. And so that's another important way that the products move. If you look at where liquid terminals sit in the value chain, supply chain, we're at two spots. One is upstream, which is feedstock gathering. So after you develop and produce hydrocarbons, they need to be stored somewhere, and so typically they're stored in a terminal. And then they go off to refining and processing, go to a chemical plant, they're converted, there's value-adding steps there. And then they are typically distributed out to the market, and so they need to be exported from locations like Houston. And so you see the terminal popping up again in this export role. And depending on which market that we have these terminals located in, they take on a slightly different role. In Houston, for liquid products, it's largely a export, so manufacturing and export market. So we see hydrocarbons being produced now more inland. We used to import a lot of crude oil into the market, but now more of that is coming from the U.S., coming to the refineries, going to the chemical plants, and then all of those products are being exported out of Houston. So, and there's also raw materials that aren't produced here that we need to bring in that go into this value chain as well that are imported, and products that are traded through here. So we have Houston would be considered a hub terminal, so over on the left, where all these different types of import-export activities are going on and value creation steps are going on. And Vopak also has locations in Rotterdam and in Singapore, which are major trade centers for Europe and also for Asia. So Houston plays that role here in the U.S. And then we have another type of terminal, which is import or export. So all these products that are made and traded need to go to their end markets. So most of that is import and then distribution into interior markets. We see much of Europe now transitioning from a production and export market to an import market. So some of our facilities are undergoing a process of investment where now you see flows coming from the U.S. Gulf Coast, and those chemicals are being consumed and imported and distributed inland into the European market. And then you have on the right-hand side industrial terminals. We see these where there's large manufacturing areas. That's the Middle East, that's China, that's Houston as well. And also in Singapore, and that's where we have the pipeline connections to chemical producers and refineries, and we're exchanging raw materials and also finished products. So I'd like to back up just for a moment here. As we've seen the dynamics develop, you heard a lot today about the hydrocarbon production, the big changes that's occurred in the past 5 years plus in the U.S., and investment has come along with that. And the investment has been trickling like a wave across this entire supply chain. So first you see investment out in the oil fields, and the hydrocarbons are developed and produced. Well, then they need to be brought to areas where they can be processed and made into more valuable products. So then pipelines are invested in, and then liquid terminals upstream are invested in. Barge and rail infrastructure goes into place. And then where we see a lot of the investment happening right now is right in the middle, which is the production and refining. And so you see refinery upgrades, you see chemical plant expansions, you see ethylene production, and eventually we'll see even more and more downstream petrochemical production as well. And we're beginning to see that leading edge of investment and interest also on this inside, on the left-hand side, the downstream, where you need to collect the products into a terminal and then export those out to markets in order to complete the value chain. And then what's the long-term outlook for growth? Well, out to 2035, estimates now are that there will be a 35%, 33% increase in oil growth and energy demand. And so everything that we're doing here is going to go out several decades into the future, and there's solid demand in the future from the emerging and developing markets that are going to support that. And so we're probably on the leading edge of what I would consider a 20, 30-year wave of prosperity and investment that we'll see in this area. And that's about it. So just wanted to give you an overview of where bulk liquid terminals sit in the entire value chain, the supply chain, and what the outlook is that we see for the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Lawrence. And now we've got Matt Woodruff.
Well, thank you. How many of you here this afternoon were here this morning and heard Gene Green's talk? Show of hands. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and sit down now because he covered, I think, in a perfect way what the situation is for infrastructure funding. There's very little I can add to that. So rather than repeat what he said, I want to talk about maybe a few broader issues. He got into some of the details of where we are on our funding bills and appropriations. And when you start looking at the broader issue of infrastructure and infrastructure funding, I want to make a distinction between the highway or the transportation bill, which is coming up for reauthorization, and the Water Resources Reform and Development Act that he mentioned earlier, the WRDA bill. And the highway bill or the transportation bill is unique in that it matches the authorization component of projects and the funding. It's probably the only bill, Spencer might correct me if there's another one out there, that is both halves wrapped in one. And so when you get a highway bill, you know what's going to be done and how it's going to be paid for from the outset. The distinction with the WRDA bill, it is only an authorization bill. It sets out policy, it says what projects should be built, but people ask me all the time, how much money did the inland waterways get in the WRDA bill? Or how much money did the Port of Houston get in the WRDA bill or any other port? The answer is zero. There is no money attached to the WRDA bill. That money has to come every year through the appropriations process. So what's the problem with that? Well, as Gene Green told you, is our appropriations process is broken. We're not moving those annual appropriations bills, and that's what really is holding us up. So I see that I have two clickers here, and I'll try this one and see if it works. Why does it matter? Well, this is a slide that speaks to the inland waterways a little bit, and that's where my main area of expertise is. The number I want you to see there is 36% of what moves on this nation's inland waterway system is petroleum, petrochemicals, and chemicals. So more than a third, and if you look, that's 2012 numbers. Think about what's been going on the last couple of years. I think that our segment of the industry is rapidly becoming the leading way, or the leading commodities on the waterways. Coal is dropping off. You've heard about the war on coal. And so as they drop off and as the movements of crude and other products rise, you're going to see this segment of the industry having a greater role in the inland waterways. And so you heard Gene talking about the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, where Congress is collecting the money and they're not spending it and the balance continues to increase. This is the Inland Waterways Trust Fund. This is a trust fund that is funded by a fuel tax on the barge industry that is used to pay for capital construction on the inland waterway system. And as you can see, in the Clinton years, they weren't spending the money and the balance was going up. And the Waterways Council, which is the national group that advocates for the inland waterways, and I'm privileged to be the chairman of that group at this point, it was formed right about the time that reached a peak with the goal of getting that trust fund spent down. And we were successful. As you can see, we got it all spent. But guess what? We found out that spending money and spending all of the money, which is where we are now, we're basically spending on an annual basis the money that comes in from the fuel tax revenue. Spending money didn't equate to completing projects. We needed new policy. The WRDA bill that was just passed contains a lot of policy provisions that should allow us to more efficiently prosecute our projects. And why is it important? I'll show you a couple of slides here in just a minute. But before I do that, I want to show you something that's equally concerning to us. This is operations and maintenance funding. And as you can see, that the red chart in particular, if you look in constant dollars, we are trending downward in our funding to maintain our waterway system at a time when that waterway system is aging and the needs are increasing. And so that really puts us at risk over time of decreasing the reliability of the system. We have to reverse that trend, and that's one of the positive things that we're seeing. Going back from O&M for a second to the capital construction side, why did we need the WRDA bill? These are some pre-WRDA numbers, and I don't expect you to read or write all this down, but these are projects that Congress has already authorized for construction. And at the rate we were going before the WRDA bill was passed, this is when the Corps estimated that they would get around to some of these. In other words, we weren't going to get these vitally needed, congressionally authorized projects completed in our lifetimes. That was unacceptable. That's why we said that there needs to be a change. And as you can see, just terrible. These are major rehab projects. Some of them wouldn't be completed until 2090. So what's the good news? Well, the good news, as Gene told you, is that the House allocated record funding for projects in the bill that they moved this session. What's the bad news? The Senate doesn't move appropriations bills because, and I at the risk of being a little bit partisan, Harry Reid doesn't want his senators to have to take tough votes. So the way he avoids that is they don't take any votes in the Senate. And so the Senate has not moved a single appropriations bill. So where we find ourselves now is we have the policy changes in WRDA. We had a strong record funding coming out of the House for a lot of our different projects. And we're going to have to wait and see what comes out of that continuing resolution, as Congressman Jean told us this morning. So what can you do? Well, I think it's really simple. We cannot rest on the laurels. We can celebrate the fact that we got the first WRDA bill since 2007 passed this year. But if we're not fighting for those annual appropriations every year, we're not going to get what the Port of Houston needs to keep the Houston Ship Channel dredged. We're not going to get what the inland waterways need to move those products to markets throughout the nation. So I'm calling on each and every one of you to become or remain an advocate for the waterways and infrastructure. It is important that your voice be heard. I can tell you that the needs of the Gulf Coast are relatively modest in comparison to those of the rest of the nation, yet we provide more economic impact to the nation through what we do on the Gulf Coast than does any other segment of the waterways. The GIWW is the most important waterway to the United States. We may not have as much tonnage as the Ohio River, but the value of our tonnage and the jobs connected to that tonnage are huge in comparison. And so you need to be good advocates for the waterways. You need to be good advocates for the port. You need to be good advocates for the highways that we need, because the transportation system is a system, and without every one of those pieces, we are not going to be able to achieve as a nation the things that we have the capability to do, which is to be the manufacturing hub for the world. So that's all I think I have time for, and I'll turn the mic back over, Commissioner.
Thank you, Matt. Chad, I know we've gone a little long. Do we have time for a couple of questions?
Time for a couple of questions.
All right. So we heard of how natural gas is driving this local economy. Are there any plans to utilize this clean burning fuel for transportation, tugs, rail, or trucks? Who wants that one first? Is your mic on here?
Thanks. On the blue water side, that is beyond inland waterway systems, there are vessels that are using methane to power their vessels. There's a lot of talk of it with respect to the brown water side, but it's a huge infrastructure change, and it's an economy of scale where do you have the infrastructure in place to deliver the liquid methane or the LNG? I can tell you that there are plans to take advantage of the huge LNG trains that will be coming online beginning the end of 2015. And there are negotiations underway for vessels to be able to receive LNG from either small terminals with pipelines or from barges. So that's in the works. Now, to what extent that takes up the entire amount of the population of the vessels is up in the air, because there's there's the ECA, the emission control area you have to worry about, the low sulfur regulations, a bunch of other things. Trains?
You ask the question again. I want to make sure I understood exactly what the question was.
We heard of how natural gas is driving the local economy. Are there any plans to utilize a clean burning fuel for transportation, i.e. tugs, rail, truck?
Okay, that's what I thought I heard. Okay. Well, currently, we're not doing anything in Houston with our locomotives, but the Burlington Northern Santa Fe in California is working with a group out there to convert a number of their locomotives to natural gas, and that is ongoing right now. So I would think that if it works, it will eventually get to the entire industry.
Yeah, Vopak has some activities in LNG, and we have a terminal in Mexico, a terminal in Rotterdam, and there is a project now for the terminal in Rotterdam. to do bunkering operations with LNG. So we're adding on to that terminal. So bunkering meaning that's what Buffalo Marine is involved in, and that's supplying fuel to seagoing vessels. So, but nothing planned in the States right now.
Okay, I think we have time for one more, and Jeff, this one's for you. PTRA. How's the PTRA influence rail car requirements for crude usage? Part 2, any concerns with new legislation related to crude by rail?
Say the first part again. I didn't, let me get my glasses.
How's the PTRA influencing rail car requirements for crude usage?
Okay. Well, as it was mentioned earlier about the barges and the things that have changed with the barges, as far as the actual rail car itself, the rail cars years ago were manufactured with a single lining. Now it's required that all rail cars handling any type of chemical, flammable, inhalation hazard, crude, anything, has to have a double lining. And I believe that that has to be completed by year 2016, if I'm not mistaken. As far as the second portion, any concerns with legislation, there's a lot going on about crude by rail. I mean, all of you have probably seen on the news where there's been a couple of crude oil incidents where evacuations, death, and all. So there's a number of things going on. Federal Railroad Administration basically is our regulatory group that oversees the railroad. So there have been some changes that have taken place about securement. Recently, there are some other changes that are actually right now that the FRA is looking at that we're not required to do yet. But there will continue to be changes with crude oil securement, the number of cars that we can haul, speed, and so forth. So that will definitely happen, no doubt about it. Thanks.
Well, those are the only 2 questions. Please give a hand to our panelists. Thank you so much. I know I enjoyed it. I hope you all did too, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.